Good evening and welcome to the Writer's Block. I'm your host, John Ronan, and as you know now, in our 27th year, I interview writers about their craft, what they're working on, what they've accomplished in the past, what they're planning for the future. It's a wider net than just writers, however. We have had on many other brands of artists. We've had on singers, we have had on sculptors, we've had on musicians, and sometimes, when we're real lucky, we get on actors. It's a wide net, as I mentioned, and I want you to think if you have any ideas for people who want to be on the Writer's Block or you think might be good for the Writer's Block. And if you do, watch for our address at the end of the program. I also want to remind you that this production is a product of Cape Ann TV, Community Access Television. It's a result of cable access to television, and it can't be got if you subscribe to Dish. Don't watch those Dish ads. Stick with cable. I'm very happy tonight to say we do have a surprise in our pattern of writers. We have on an actor educator this evening by the name of Jay Prima. A name that would be very familiar to many of you because he taught in the Gloucester system for many, many years. Jay is originally a resident of Lunenburg, Massachusetts, where he went to high school, and he came east to go to Gordon College a few years ago. He's been in Gloucester since 2000, and most of that time, except for the recently retired a couple of years, he taught at O'Malley Middle School. He is not just Jay Prima, he is Dr. Jay Prima. He has a doctorate in educational theater, which he took at New York University. Welcome to the Writer's Block,
Thank
Jay.
you, John.
Thank you for coming down.
My pleasure.
It is nice, refreshing to have an actor on. I want to ask you how you first got interested in acting. When did that start?
It's an interesting story because it connects right to my teaching. I graduated from Gordon studying history and theology. And when I graduated, I returned home to Lunenburg to do my student teaching at my high school.
Your old high school?
My alma mater. And I was teaching social studies, and I was teaching a 2-week session on Sigmund Freud for 11th graders. So after teaching for the 2 weeks, I noticed there was a theater company in town housed right in the center of Lunenburg. It was an educational theater troupe. What were they doing? Historical characters. I looked at their repertoire, and one of the characters was Sigmund Freud.
Really?
So I asked the director at the time, I said, if I brought my students up, we could pay you $2 each or something. Can we see what you're doing? And he certainly welcomed us. And I saw within that 1 hour of performance, what I had tried to teach for 2 weeks was so concrete and visceral that the students were blown away by it. And
this person doing a half hour?
1 hour portrayal, a monologue of Sigmund Freud, yes, his early years, his discoveries, etc. And at that point, I became converted to the gospel of educational theater. So
and you wanted to do historical
pieces, yeah.
Historical
I ended up touring
monologues.
with them. I ended up touring with them for almost 3 years after I finished my student teaching, before I went into teaching theater after that.
So you took a 3-year sabbatical into pure theater.
An immersion of pure theater through all the schools, K through college in New England. So
I know that one of the historical figures you've done often is Henry David Thoreau,
yes.
the famous writer and philosopher who's spoken in Gloucester.
That's right.
Back in the Lyceum days of the mid-1800s.
That's right. Yeah.
You have a piece of a flyer.
Yeah.
You hold up.
Sure.
We have a clip to show, but first I want to show this flyer. Let me see if I can hold that up for Connor to catch. This was a flyer for production at the sponsored by the Cape Ann Writers Center. And I think This is from 2014, although you've done it many times.
Yes.
And we have a clip, I think that Becky is going to put up right now.
Okay.
And we can look at that with our audience to see what this sort of performance really means.
Sure.
Henry David Thoreau.
Thank you.
The sea. I lived alone in the woods, a mile from any neighbor, in a house I built myself, on the shore of Walden Pond in Concord, Massachusetts, and earned my living by the labor of my hands only. I lived there 2 years and 2 months, and at present I am a sojourner in civilized life again. Now, I should not obtrude my affairs so much on the notice of my hearers if very peculiar inquiries had not been made by my townsmen concerning my mode of life, what I got to eat, if I did not feel lonesome, if I was not afraid, and the like. So I will therefore ask those of my auditors who feel no particular interest in me to pardon me if I undertake to answer some of these questions. I should not talk so much about myself if there were anybody else whom I knew as well.
Very good. We're back. That was a good brief clip to show what it's like to be another person.
Right. Yes.
Thoreau is one of many people you've done, and I know that many of these historical figures are in this book you've been kind enough to give me, the Beauport Anthology, and I want to hold that up too. Yeah. Can you tell us about this book, Jay, and who's in it?
Sure.
What historical characters?
All right. So it's a collection of dramatic monologues of historical characters from Gloucester, 1600 to 1900. And I spent a number of years researching characters in the Cape Ann region through the Cape Ann Museum and the library and the historical societies, and decided that I wanted to let students know about their ancestors in this town, so to speak. So I started with Mesconomet, the native sachem that actually sold Ipswich, and his grandson sold Gloucester back in the day. And then I went into the early fish adventure explorers, the Dorchester adventurers that set up shop at Stagefort Park, or what was known as Fisherman's Field. I went through the early religious periods, through Reverend John White and the Dogtown women, and to some of the women that were incited for witchcraft in Gloucester that had to stand trial. So there's a range of characters. And then I have Captain John Smith, Samuel de Champlain, Reverend John and Judith Sargent Murray, and later on Fitzhenry Lane, Sam Sawyer, General Benjamin Butler, Howard Blackburn, of course, and some other maybe not so well known characters. John J. Watson is a fisherman musician, and of course Mason Walton, the hermit of Ravenswood. So these are characters.
Quite a collection.
I know it is. It was
and you've gotten into all those heads. Yes.
It's true, but I dramatized and put it in a monologue form. So you gather the historical material, but then you have to think, how do you make it concise and find a point in their life where they want to express something that's of substance to them. So
you distill it down. Just as in any drama, you don't show people eating and sleeping. You got to get to the action.
Right. Yeah.
And then you have to memorize it, of course.
Yes, that's true. I was fortunate to cast a really good group of performers, some professional equity, some community-based actors that were willing to take it on tour we had like 6 shows here in Gloucester and in Manchester Historical.
You mentioned before we went on, I think that your doctoral thesis at NYU was on monologues.
That's right.
And so there's a long history of that in legitimate theater, big-time legitimate theater.
No, that's true.
That's true. It's not a new idea.
No, it isn't. In fact, I just wrote an article for the New England Theater Journal about a woman, Ruth Draper, who was one of the early monologists in her time, 1950s, that kind of gave acceptability to the genre of solo performance. So she was a pioneer, so to speak, in that field. But after that, many people came, like Hal Holbrook doing Twain, or Emlyn Williams doing Charles Dickens. So I looked at a lot of those. And
a lot of women, too, I think.
That's true.
Emily Dickinson's on the stage
that's right.
often these days.
Yes, that's right. So my research at NYU was really to find what makes a successful monodrama, to look at the structure and based on the critical reviews. So that's what I did.
A name that you mentioned earlier from the list of personages in Beauport anthology was Captain John Smith.
Yes.
From the 1600s.
That's
Can
right.
you give us just a couple sentences of historical background to remind us, non-historians, of who Captain John Smith was?
Well, we know he's from England. He traveled a lot of the coast, Virginia, and all the way up to Canada. And there's the story about Pocahontas and he falling in love. But so he did one of the first explorations here, and we named Smith Cove after Captain John Smith, who landed here and kind of assessed the area and reported back to the king at the time, saying, this area is worthy of cultivating, and not only fish, but timber. And we have a great performer, Duncan Nelson, who portrays that character.
And we have a clip of Captain John Smith.
Yes.
And this is not you, but
Duncan Nelson.
Duncan Nelson.
Yes.
We can go to that now, I think. We have another brief
All right.
clip.
Thanks.
It had been my intention that it be called Dragabixanda, for it was she, a fair Indian maiden, Byzantine maiden, excuse me, a fair Byzantine maiden who intervened on my behalf when I was imprisoned and condemned to death by the Turks. Prince Charles, however, when I sought his support for my further explorations, insisted that it be named for his mother, Anne of Denmark. And so it has come to be called Cape Anne. Had the French claim prevailed, that of Champlain, it would have been Cap aux Îles, and Gloucester would have been Beauport. How fortunate indeed that our English tongues need no longer take so French a twist. I recognized on first coming here that this New England would add immeasurably to Britain's already sovereign power. For the sea provides a richer, more constant harvest than any can be drawn from the land. Any that can be drawn from the land. So I encourage the king to develop here a commercial empire, one based upon what might be considered a lowly, even contemptible foundation, that of fish. And there was timber, too, in abundance, particularly oak, a staple of the Royal Navy. In this latitude, I saw opportunity, by land and by sea, for extraordinary fruitfulness.
Thank you for that clip. It's nice to get into these characters and see the power of the writing, your writing, and here another talented person, Duncan Nelson, doing Captain Smith. I have to ask, I thought about this when the clip was on, are the stories about Captain Smith and Pocahontas all legend and not to be paid attention to?
I think, I didn't research that part of his history particularly. I was looking at his time here. So I think some of it's based on historical elements, but it's extracted. And
so she does not figure in your...
no, she doesn't.
In your mind.
No.
You've brought a couple interesting items here that we haven't shown yet. One, and I want to make sure we have time for this because you spent a great deal of time teaching in Gloucester at O'Malley,
Yeah.
teaching young adults, junior high school
Right.
students, and you worked with theater.
Yes.
Your doctorate is in theater education.
Right.
What do you do with these students, young students?
Well, I taught performing arts as a specialist, so I had daytime classes, and we explored a lot of aspects of dramatic literature, improvisation, a little bit of acting skills, some directing pieces, and we had an after-school drama program which is still very vibrant, casts of hundreds now. In those days, there were probably casts of 30 or 40, but I had a collection of students that I was working with monologues that I had written, and I was testing it out with them, seeing how they felt what was true, what rang true, what they might do to help dramatize it. And so we worked on this through a year. It's called Middle School Moments, and took it to the New England Theater Conference and headlined one of the years there. And I had a publisher from New Plays Incorporated that had attended the show and came up to me after and said, I want to publish this piece. So it was a collaborative effort, and it was tested over time with real middle schoolers, their stories.
So these are little vignettes.
Vignettes.
By partly you.
Right.
And some of the students?
With their input. I framed the monologue pieces and then tweaked it as we worked it in rehearsal. So the way I structured that was you had one primary character delivering the monologue, but groups of kids behind dramatizing or illustrating what the scenes were about.
It was kind of an ensemble production.
It was, absolutely.
I want to hold this up. Middle School Moments by J. Prima. I want to see if Connor can get that. It's a nice little chapbook. When did this come out, Jay?
That was in 2008, I believe.
Were the students really receptive to acting? And
they were very excited. In fact, they took ownership, which was great, because what else can you hope for as a director, for them to have an investment? And I had them audition for certain monologues, so they had the scripts prior to the first audition. They knew 2 or 3 that they really wanted. So that was full of great motivation and creativity, I felt like.
That's good to hear. As I mentioned before the show, I've substitute taught junior high, and I just admire your energy to keep up with their energy.
Oh, they give you energy, that's for sure.
Quite a feat.
Yes.
I wanted to read the list of people mentioned in Beauport Anthology, which you largely did before, but I want to go down this list because there's another character in here that we have a clip for. You mentioned John James Babson, he's the narrator for
yes, he
the
opens
whole book, and he's the famous Gloucester historian.
Right.
Mesconomet,
Yeah.
Samuel de Champlain, Captain John Smith, Lord Sheffield, Reverend John White, Abigail Soames, Reverend John White, again.
Yes, one of Gloucester and one of Dorchester.
Is he a grandson?
No, they're not related, ironically.
Thomasine, am I saying that?
Yep.
Thomasine Younger, Easter Carter, Peg Wesson, Reverend John and Judith Sargent Murray, Fitzhenry Lane, Samuel Sawyer, General Benjamin Butler, Elizabeth Stewart Phelps Ward, Alfred Centennial Johnson, Howard Blackburn, Captain Eldridge on Kipling's Visit to Gloucester, John J. Watson. I think I've seen you do John J. Watson, the composer. And
right, that was by Bradley Royds.
Mason Walton and James Pringle. One of the names I just mentioned is Abigail Soames. We have not seen a female character yet, and I know we have a clip of Abigail Soames being played by Nora Messier.
That's right.
And I think we could go to see Abigail right now and see that clip.
Spring and fall of '92 is the season of the witch, at least here on Cape Ann and Salem. A young, loudmouth girl servant of John and Elizabeth Proctor, only 20 years of age, accused me of sundry acts of witchcraft, or should I say, high suspicion thereof committed on her body. So that's all it takes to get Constable Peter Osgood to put me in custody, even though I was sick. May 13th, I was put in the house of Master Thomas Beadle. in Salem, and later officially interrogated. When I entered the courtroom on Prison Lane and looked at my accuser, she started screaming out, "Though I know her not before, this is that very woman who hath appeared to me in apparition, hath afflicted me the whole day, and bit me exceedingly as she came in the gate." Well, I stood dumbfounded, and then someone searched my apron and took out this great crocheting needle from near my belly, and I swear I had no recollection of having placed it there. Then she says that my specter told her the name of my brother, John, and that I had lain bedrid a year. I made no comment, as anyone could have gathered that information. But then she says that my specter confessed to being the instrumental means of death to Mr. Southwick. Then I gave that young slanderer a look, and sure enough, she went into a dreadful fit, twisting and turning and shrieking, claiming that my specter threatened to kill her that day and was plucking pins in her side. After all this commotion, my landlady took to the stand and testified that I had generally kept to my bed in the last 13 months. Well, Miss Warren said that it was my specter who went out of the house at night. Then the judges asked me, who is torturing Miss Warren to cause these fits? All I can say is it was the enemy hurt her. I tried to explain how fanciful stories can originate, but I think they took it wrong. Then she starts twitching her mouth, and I tell them that I myself have been afflicted and thought I saw many a body hurt me in Gloucester, that I might have accused many as well. Miss Warren goes into another one of her fits, and the judges tell me to take her hand 3 times, and when I do that, she is calm. Then they tell her to touch me, and when she tries, she falls down, again throwing a dreadful fit. They tell me to take her hand again, and when I do, she is calm. Now, when she explained to the judge that my apparition came out of my body and warned her not to touch me, I just laughed. Surprise. When I laugh, Mary goes into another one of her fits. Then the judges begin to accuse me of these misdeeds. All I can just do is laugh at them. I'm sure that didn't help my case, but all I could see is this foolish girl throwing tantrums, trying to persuade these serious men about the veracity of her claims. She starts twitching her mouth again, and they command me to look at her. I had had enough of their charade, so I turned around with my eyes closed and touched her as told. Of course, the girl was calm until I opened my eyes again. Now, I read the record of the court scribe. In this manner, Abigail Solmes practiced her witchcraft several times before the court. Reverend Nicholas Noyes of Salem observed that once the crochet needle had been removed, Warren was neither bit nor pinched. I also read that she saw me afflict Ann Putnam and Mary Walcott also. Though I have no knowledge of these young liars, I am certain they are co-conspirators. All 3 signed a document as witnesses against me. And so I was sent to Boston 10 days later and remained in prison without trial for 7 months. I was finally released on January 6, 1693. I believe the season had passed.
Thank you very much for that. That was good to get a female star in from our history, and to see Nora Messier in that role. We have no more clips, but we have a couple stills that you were good enough to bring, and I'm going to ask if we can show each of those stills in succession real quickly so we can get them in. I'm making it there we go. This is still of the Murrays. Can you describe that for us?
Certainly. It's based on John and Judith Sargent Murray, and it's a piece within Beauport Anthology. But I've done a larger version of it in a play called Mingling of Souls, From Sorrow to Joy, and that's being re-performed at the UU Church this coming Middle Street Walk.
Okay, that will be behind us by the time this airs.
No problem.
But it's good to have that information for the Mingling of Souls for future performances.
Right.
The second still we have is Fitzhenry Lane. And this, tell us who this star is.
I'm playing the role of Fitzhenry Lane. Have a great affinity with him and love his work. So he was part of the cast of Beauport Anthology as well.
Thank you for all of those. We have just a couple of minutes here. I want to thank you for bringing all those visual aids. It's quite a treat for us because usually it's just talking and we don't get to go off camera and get some colorful action in. Tell me what you're planning next, Jay.
Well, I've actually been taking some of the Beauport anthology and putting it into a juvenile book of colorful characters from Gloucester's past.
Colorful characters from Gloucester's past.
Yeah. And I was fortunate that Awesome Gloucester helped fund the cost of the illustrations.
Tell us about Awesome Gloucester.
Awesome Gloucester is awesome. They basically give an award of $1,000 to certain projects that they consider worthy, that highlight events in Gloucester or projects that are ongoing.
I think that's once a month?
Yes, that's correct.
So $1,000 a month is a nice,
I know.
Generous
Very
stipend.
generous, yes.
And it's not a long, drawn-out process.
No, it wasn't.
You
it wasn't
you
too
make your
difficult.
pitch and you find out.
That's true.
When will this be out?
Well, I've been working on it. Part of it is just I have such great illustrations. This is Abigail Soames.
Some of the people.
Yeah,
we saw
it's right
now.
from it, but it's done for younger audiences. So
for
for
junior high?
juvenile readers,
Junior high?
probably junior high would be
It's good
best.
that kids are exposed to theater. I see students who've not been ever
Yeah.
to a stage play unless maybe their high school
Right,
play.
right.
And that's it.
Yes.
We're almost out of time, a few seconds. Jay Prima, I want to thank you very much for coming down to the Writer's Block and talking about theater and acting and education and combining all those with energy and talent.
Thank you so much
Appreciate
for having
your
me,
time.
John. I appreciate it.
I want to thank you as well in Cablecast land for being with us this evening on the Writer's Block. If you've learned something about theater and education and Gloucester history from Jay DePrima, Dr. Jay DePrima this evening, then the Writer's Block has done its job. Thanks for being with us, and I hope to see you again next week on the Writer's Block. Good night.